Welcome to the Rising Laterally podcast. This is about connecting industries, technologies, histories, and psychologies to find intersections that can lead to personal and professional growth. Our conversations will be a blend of research, insights, and personal stories, and we hope by listening you become more fascinated about yourself and the world you live in. On behalf of Jay Baloo, this is Arjun Jay, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome back to the Rising Laterally podcast. Thank you to our listeners, and as always, a big thank you to our subscribers. We're available on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, any podcast platform. Please check us out. We're going to get into it today. Today's guest is Mark Warren. Mark comes to us as a 32-year veteran of the financial services industry. He's got a bachelor's degree and an MBA in marketing from UC San Diego. Mark has built a program he's going to share with us today, the Power Brand program. He's actually been using it to help financial advisors grow competitive practices by emphasizing personal branding and persuasion to enhance the way they sell. The beauty of this program, though, and Mark and I have talked a little bit about it, is that it's not only applicable to financial services or to financial advisors. Really, any salesperson, marketer, entrepreneur, I think we'll get something meaningful out of it. Arjun and I are both very excited to experience the Power Brand program today. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Mark, thank you for being here with us this morning.
Hey, Jay. Thanks, Arjun. Thanks for having me on the call. I'm glad to be here with your podcast. I'm excited for you guys. You got something cool going, and I hope it turns into a great brand for you all. And you have a lot of great followers that, get something out of the different speakers you have on. I noticed, by the way, you've had some wonderful topics on so far, so I'm humbled to be a part of the next one here today. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Oh yeah, we're grateful to have you. Thank you, Mark. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the purpose of the Power Brand program in your own words and how you've kind of been honing it over the years.
Yeah, so I think we're going to talk a little bit about what power branding is, but I think the really cool thing is if we just sort of had a little test or dialogue here as we're together, and this will drive the point home. So if I was to ask your audience that's listening today about name for me 3 laundry detergents, and I said that people could maybe click into it, but if I said name for me 4 or 5, it gets really hard to do that. So I'm going to just say name 4 or 5 laundry detergents for me. Just write them down, A lot of people get the category killer, right? But what do you guys think? Jump in.
There's Downy.
Yep.
Fabric softener, but they do make a detergent.
Okay.
What else? Jay, jump in. You guys are doing laundry?
We got Clorox.
Tide.
Tide, right?
Tide, category killer.
Yeah.
There you go. Category killer.
I'm trying to
Go
think.
Jay, you were
about-
touching on Clorox?
Yeah, does Clorox do?
Clorox.
Yeah.
We can say it's a bleach, but they also do make a detergent now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to think of the other big one though. To your point, so we got Tide.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it is hard.
It's hard. Okay. Let's move on to one other. How about name for me 4 or 5 toothpaste?
Crest.
Colgate.
The 2 category killers by far. Anything else come to mind?
Aquafresh.
Good. Yeah, it's
Yep.
great. Anything
Yep.
else? Can you get the 4? Can you get the 5?
Tom's.
Tom's. There you go. Specialty brand. Good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. How about we'll go one more category? How about, and if you're in the audience, you want to write these down. How about name 4 or 5 deodorants?
Old Spice.
Old Spice.
I have a great story to tell you about Old Spice. Remind me when we get done this little exercise I want to share with you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, Old Spice has actually come up on the show before, so I'm excited to hear your story. Well, I guess Axe. Axe is a little bit of a thing of the past, but it counts. Yeah.
Axe is a thing of the past because you all are getting older.
If
you were 14 years old, you'd still be on it. So let me tell you a couple stories about Axe and Old Spice, and then we'll talk about the little exercise we just did. So Axe, if you Google their first ad, it's an ingenious ad. They used a concept from the 1930s, which anchored people into buying really expensive cars. In the 1930s, you only had print media. You didn't have the social media we have today. You don't have podcasts. You don't have other things like that. So Axe used a technique called blonde hair, red dress. And what blonde hair, red dress is, it's a way to anchor expensive cars. If you buy this car, you get pleasure, you get this, you get that. 1930s, check it out. Look at the old Life magazines, the old Time magazines, and you'll see it was ad after ad after ad for high-end cars. So really sort of interesting. So if you take that and move it forward, what Axe did was they basically recreated that ad in the grocery store aisle for deodorant, where a young kid about 14, 15 years old was walking down the aisle. He's searching for deodorant. He pulls Axe off the shelf. And if you remember the original ad, then he got tackled by a woman, blonde hair, red dress, coincidentally, in the first ad, tackles him in the aisle. And he then, therefore, they go in this whole spiel about why you want Axe and makes you irresistible to women and all these other kind of things. And what the ad's about is we peel back the ad, when they do what's called resiliency rates on ads like that, when they interview young men between the ages of 14 and 18 and ask them if they really believe that they would ever get tackled in the grocery store aisle because they bought the thing, the resiliency rate's really high. It's like over 90%, or they actually believe that would happen to them based on the ad they saw on TV, which made Axe just took off. And what was happening in the, not to spend a lot of time on it, but it's going to help us with branding here. The deodorant aisle is really bifurcated by gender. So to increase market share, you had to go after a different market. It wasn't just enough to go after men or women. You had to go after younger men or women. And therefore, you had to come up with a different kind of process to market, probably the same kind of deodorant that you're making for men. You just put under a different label, right? Because the chemical makeup of deodorant is pretty much the same across the board. It's whether it has a fresh new lemon scent or, is it go on one way versus another. And then on Old Spice, they had the best ad ever a few years ago. I don't know if you remember it, but it was the ad with the mother, and she was crying because her son used Old Spice, and then he got his first girlfriend, and then she lost her relationship with her son, and they were kind of making fun of the mom, right? And they were really making fun. It was really well done. The ads were funny. The casting was really good. The problem was they upset the person who was buying the deodorant. The mom was going to the store and buying that deodorant for her son. And when they made fun of her, that campaign crashed, even though the ad was really effective, but they, in a sense, upset everyone who was the buying unit. So it's really sort of interesting, how that works. And by the way, you can't find that. You can find an ad, now on Google, but that ad had a really effective rates of watch, but it didn't have a great process of getting more sales because it just upset the end, quote, the end buyer, not the end user, the end buyer. Two different things in that case. So sort of interesting. So anyway, we were talking and I challenged you in the audience, name 4 or 5 laundry detergents, toothpaste, or deodorants. And what that's called, guys, is shelf of the mind theory. And let me just explain what that is. Shelf of the mind theory means the way your brain is made, you typically only have room for 2 or 3 viable products in any particular product category. So asking for 4 or 5 is really hard because we're just not wired that way. We're wired for 2 or 3 in any particular product category. So whether it's detergent, whether it's deodorant, or whether it's toothpaste, it could be financial services, something I'm pretty familiar with, but it could also be, how do you get a job? How do you grow in your work? How do you, if you're starting a new company, how do you get VC money? How do you separate yourself from everyone else who's out there trying to be one of the 2 or 3 with everyone that's applying for that particular position or looking to grow their capital? Maybe you have some clients on this call that have a really cool app they're getting started, or something they want to work in, or maybe they have a new technology that they're getting involved with, whatever that looks like. I mean, it's really hard to differentiate and to get people to believe in what you're doing and to help you along relative to others. So the question really becomes, when we talk about branding and power branding, and Jay, to your point earlier, what does that all mean? It's about how do you not be number 4 or 5 or number 112 for that matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get into the top 3, and what does that look like? And maybe we can bat that around a little bit today.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting too. You bring up the idea of trying to differentiate yourself as a person, looking at something like the financial services industry that we're all familiar with. there tend to be in every region, I imagine, a couple wholesalers that sort of function as category killers in terms of their salespersonship. So it extends far beyond just products on a grocery store shelf. Whenever you're in competition with other people, it seems like two or three people rise to the top and rise to the front of mind of the customer base or the client base, which is really interesting.
Whoever that customer base is. That's why I think Amazon's been so interesting. They're not necessarily designing or manufacturing any of the products they sell, although they do have some that they sell now. But what they do is they got into one of those top 3 spots, number 1 in most cases, with the delivery mechanism. So they didn't even do it on the manufacturer. They did it on the delivery side. And then based on the delivery side, it's allowed them the opportunity to differentiate, because if you're not ordering it overnight from Amazon, who are you ordering it from? Who's the next category killer below them? Is it the U.S. Postal Service, FedEx, DHL, UPS? I really don't know.
So what kinds of questions should organizations like that be asking themselves right now, or a person within an organization who's trying to crack the top 5 and get into that top 3 of mindshare? I mean, what sort of questions should they be asking themselves?
Yeah, I think they've got to follow a format of what really great brands do. And again, this isn't any magic, and it doesn't matter what industry. Now, again, brands will do different things, Arjun, in different niches that they might work, and the way they serve their customers or find customers or whatever. They're not all going to do the same thing. But what is interesting is they all do these 3 things, and they have a tendency to do them pretty well. So the first one is, and this is not the rule book, maybe it's not even the commandment for it, but one of the things they do is they make it easy to be acquired. So the first thing that great brands do is they make it easy to be acquired. So wherever they are on the spectrum, and you're asking the question is through the eyes of a business owner, if I'm a business owner and I'm sitting down with my annual plan, my monthly plan, I'm checking where I'm at, I'm making sure I got a business plan, I'm trying to implement the plan. One of the lenses that I'm going to use to sort of filter through my mind and my eyes is, when we make this decision, does this make it easy for our clients? Does it make it easy for our clients to find us? Does it make it easy for prospects to find us? Does it make it easy for my clients to purchase? Does it make it easy for my prospects to purchase? Does it make it easy for them in case of some products to make a return? What does that look like if I'm not satisfied with the product? How do we make it easy? And easy to acquire comes in a lot of different forms. But I would submit to you that if you think about it, the best thing that someone can do is think about how it would apply to themselves. So if I'm in college currently, and if you just got out of college, you might want to think about this, and internships are all the rage in college today, right? How do you win an internship in college from the professor or from some group there? I would submit to you, make it easier for them to bring you on than any other student. And what does that look like? You have punctuality in that particular case. Show up on time. Pretty simple, easy thing, but boy, it can have huge ramifications in an internship program, maybe where there's 10 or 12 interns and you screened 120 people to get those 12, and one shows up to work on time and all the other ones don't.
Right.
That's something. Okay, so now I start my first job. It's the same process, right? If I want to be promoted and I want to grow in the organization and I want to maybe move up the ladder and I want to have more responsibility and maybe I want to lead, whatever that looks like, I've got to make it easy for my bosses and for my coworkers and for my customers to do business. And I want to help everyone on that chain, if you will, whether it's the person I report up to, whether it's the people that are equal with me and my peers, whether I have some people reporting into me, and the ultimate customer. And if I can figure out ways to make it easy for people to enjoy their job, and when I say easy, by the way, I'm not saying it's easy to do all the time. What I'm saying is I want to make it easy for those individuals to be able to interact with me in a fashion that makes sense. And there's a lot of interesting things happening there. So that would be the first rule of thumb.
Can we just pull on that just a little bit? Because for the person that has gone from internship to landing a job that they think is going to be a career path, for that person, talk about the journey they might have to go on if they didn't immediately come into that organization and make it easy. So, it's like the first impression of that person may not be what the ultimate impression should be. So how
Sure.
should a person go around? Maybe it's like 2 or 3 years into their career, and
Sure.
they finally have come to a decision as to what they want to do. But for the first 2 or 3 years, they weren't clear with their management or their coworkers. And so how does that person then reverse
Yeah.
that course?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that happen there, in all honesty. We might as well lay it out, right? There's one way to do that is move on to another firm, take all the, right? And
Yeah.
I mean that, move on to another firm, take all those mistakes that you made, look, you've now learned from them, and then you go to another place and you create a different first impression,
Okay.
right? Because, I mean, that's one solution. I mean, we might
Yep.
as well look at them all. That's one solution. The other solution is to chalk it up as, okay, I fell over, stepped, tripped, fell, whatever, stepped all over myself here. I didn't even know what we were selling when I came into the organization when I
Yeah.
first started, right? But now I do, right? You said 3 years down the road, Arjun, now you're kind of going along with it. Now I know
Yeah.
what I'm selling and what that looks like. So, okay, how do I do that? Do I go back? Do I reset the clock, or do I start from where I am and then move along? And I would submit to you that you can spend a lot of time bailing out the boat and trying to reset the clock. And I'm not suggesting you shouldn't apologize if you did things wrong, or you shouldn't acknowledge and self-deprecate to the things that you really fell on and
Right.
use those, but use them as examples of how that's helped you in the journey and how you've learned. And showing people how you've learned is a really big deal, which in a sense leads to the next thing that great brands all do, which, I know we were going to talk about it. Let me just jump in because you're asking sort of a question about, okay, I didn't get the easy to acquire, but how do I get back to that? And really what you got to do is you got to step into the second thing that great brands do, and that is they perform.
Mm-hmm.
And what does performance mean? And it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. If it's the car industry, performance is, can I go from 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds if that's what they say that car can do? Will the car stop, because the brakes work? If I'm on an airplane, not a lot of people are flying anymore, but if I was on an airplane, is their safety record what they say it is? Do they land and take off safely time after time after time? Do they go to the destinations I want to go to? I don't want to get on an airplane going to Hawaii and I end up in, some other town on the East Coast. Not there's anything wrong with the town on the East Coast, but that wasn't my ultimate destination. So there's a lot of things to performance. Some people talk about performance with the, their 5-star service model. And we'll talk a little more about that as we close today with some hotel chains and what that looks like. But I think there's something else to performance. And again, for your listeners today, I would just ask you, if you're going to take one note, take this note. Great brands never ever compare themselves to things they don't control.
Mm.
So let's think about what that looks like. Great brands never ever compare themselves to things they don't control. In the industry that I am, a lot of portfolio people and asset management companies all compare themselves to the S&P 500, which is a great idea, but a lot of people don't control the S&P 500. So if you do that, you might want to try your whole life to beat it and do better and whatever that looks like. But boy, you've really violated a major principle of marketing. That's why you see things in that particular part of the industry that are S&P 500 this or S&P 500 that kind of things, because some people just decided, well, my brand will be that I never can outperform what I don't control, and that can be a legitimate brand. But I would submit to you that more importantly is, what does it look like from your own individual standpoint? So, for example, as we're talking about people that are getting off, yes, a great question there about, I'm 3 years in. I love the company I'm with. I understand what we do. I'm not going to leave, right? Because that was one way we could go. What would be next? And I would submit to you next is, then you start to really define your performance characteristics. And then you share those performance characteristics with your boss, with your peers, with those that may be under you. And again, this is full service thing. I'm not a big fan of just managing up here, right? I'm a big fan if you really want to be the person that's going to run the company one day, you've got to understand how to interact with everyone. Because one day you have to interact, if you're the CEO, with the board of directors, right? Even though you're not managing really up to anyone anymore, you are held accountable. So as you think about that, and I see it a lot in, the tech space, we have some really young people that have some awesome ideas, some very innovative ideas. And as they start to get a lot of traction, they have to either A, surround themselves with other people who have expertise they don't have, or they spend a lot of time failing and using the capital that they've been awarded to fix things that they could have hired somebody else to fix for a lot less cost, right? And it's this idea of, well, can I perform? And what does performance look like? And I'll give you an example. So individual goes to college, then goes to grad school and wants to be a veterinarian. So in the time they're in college, they get an internship with the military, the Department of Defense, and they work in the area of dolphin training down in San Diego. And there's bases down there with the U.S. Navy SEALs and all this kind of stuff. And they're doing all kind of dolphin training. And the dolphin training they do is for mine detection, for mines in the water around U.S. naval ships, or swimmers in the water, possibly somebody that's underwater, trying to do some kind of covert thing, whatever it is. They got that training and did it for 3 years of undergrad. Now, when they go to apply at veterinarian school, they have a very unique thing on their resume, right? A very unique thing. What do you think happens to that person then when they go to apply at vet schools? Do they get a lot of looks or a few looks? The average look at a vet school, you might get 3 or 4 people to look at you, 3 or 4 schools. And if you're lucky, you get into one. In that particular scenario I just said, they got looked at by about 15 schools.
Wow.
Now, let's just play this forward a little bit. So they go into these interviews, right? Person has good undergrad, has good, the good grades for the veterinarian version of the MCAP tests, that kind of stuff. So how did they get into all the schools they wanted to? And by the way, they got accepted to like 12 of 15 schools. That's unheard of. Well, the way they do that is you see on their resume, they have this performance characteristic. They work for the Navy, blah, 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 blah. But the thing that they don't share is, and they did it intentionally, is that they had to get top secret clearance. So think about it for a minute. We're all sitting together. Everyone on your podcast is on the board of the veterinarian school. That person comes in. The first thing that catches your eye is this really cool thing with dolphin training and all that. And you're hiring somebody to go to vet school, basically, to allow them into vet school. And that person says, yeah, I'd love to tell you all about it. It was a really exciting 3 summers. Do you have a top secret security clearance? Besides the fact that everybody in the room laughs about it, right. You don't have that hurdle, but then that changes the whole dynamic because that's a performance standard. And I would submit to you, for the person that you're talking about 3 years into the business now with the company that they're with, and if they like the company they're with, they've got to define some of those performance standards based on their industry, what's important to their organization, what's important to the people they work for, what's important to their customer base. And if they're willing to do that, again, now what they're doing is they're controlling the brand, because great brands don't compare themselves to things they don't control. So you create control, right, of whatever that is. And maybe, depending on who you work for, maybe it is. Maybe you're working on a dating app, right? If you're working on a dating app, with a company and you're new in the game, you got to figure out, well, I guess part of the dating app world is how do we get more people to come online to play it? It's not a question about how many more dates you get, right? It's maybe for the end user it is, but it's a question about how many more players can we get online, because then we build a universe which then allows us to get more dates. Right. So it's how do you create value? What's your value in that? Whether you be a coder or a marketing person in that environment, what does that look like? So great brands are really good at performing, and are good at controlling their performance standard.
And once you've established a great brand and you've sort of built that performance standard, any sort of tips and tricks around being able to maintain that brand and maintain that perception with your audience or your client or your user base over a 10-20 year period where you may need to be sort of evolving along the way?
Yeah, that's where the rubber really hits the road. It's funny you ask that because it is the third tenet of a great brand. So we've talked about making it easy to acquire. We've talked about performance, whatever that is, could be a five-star work model, whatever that is. And the last thing is great what the great brands do really well is they reassure. They're
Mm.
constantly reassuring their end users about why they purchased, why they stayed at, why they flew on X, why they use Y, whatever that is. So they're in a reassurance mode, Jay. So they're constantly reassuring their client base. So I'll give you an example. In the life insurance industry, there's a company called Northwest Mutual Life, and they provide a very high end life insurance product, which is a very difficult thing to sell. People don't want to talk about death a lot, right? But they sell this product and they've been able to sell it for 75 to 100 years, right? But for the last 75 years, they've been the most expensive in that particular space for what they do, but they have the highest renewal rates. So, how do you do that if you're most expensive? They have really good reassurance strategies. I'll give you another example of that. In the mid 1970s, Wrigley chewing gum was the monopoly in the gum business by far. They had 89, 90, 95% of the market, depending on how you looked at it. Five entrepreneurs decided they wanted to take some market share from Wrigley. None of them were from the gum industry. So what they decided to do was they decided to do it not on easy to acquire and not on performance, although they built that in. What they decided to do to make their main thing was the reassurance strategy. And the way they reassured was the fact that they had this ingenious little tagline every time you saw a Trident sugarless gum ad. And the line went like this: 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Trident sugarless gum for their patients that chew gum. So what they were doing was they were using a third-party testimonial from an expert, the dentist, right? 4 out of 5, really high number, right? And if you were going to chew gum and you didn't want to have cavities, the only option was Trident. Wrigley's didn't do that for you. Although I would submit to you that all gums are the same the way they make them. Yeah, they flavored it a little differently. They put it in a little different size. They made their gums smaller and fatter, kind of thicker piece. But if you rolled it out, they were the exact same volume. So it wasn't like you got more with one than the other. They created almost like an optical illusion around that. But the big thing they did was they used a reassurance strategy. And they were so good at it, by the way, they took 15% share from Wrigley. And then ultimately, Trident was bought by Wrigley, and then it's been spun off and bought by some other companies. Really interesting when you think about how it works. So if we
Another
go
good
back to
example
yeah, go
might be
ahead.
Peloton. I mean, they
100%.
reassure all the time with the badges that you get and the constant reminder of how well you're doing and where you are even on the leaderboard and things like that. So they're doing a great job, in my opinion, with the reassurance.
So talk about that a little bit more. How many rides have you done?
I'm at 81 rides and
So
51
how do you know
runs.
that? Right? Yeah, because they
Right.
they re,
Right.
they reassure you. How many runs?
51.
Yeah. Do you have a goal?
Yeah, I'm trying to get both of those to 100.
Yeah. So they're reassuring you all the way to 100. So you get 19 more reassurances when you get to 100 on the ride, and you get 49 more. How ingenious is that?
Yeah.
And the instructors, the way they're trained on Peloton, is they're reassuring you during the 30, 45 or hour training session you're doing, or 75-minute training session if you happen to be up to that level yet. I mean, how
Yeah.
great is that?
And you mentioned Amazon earlier, Mark. The other thing that Amazon started doing recently that I really appreciate is when they successfully deliver a package, not only will they send me an email letting me know the package has been successfully delivered, but they also send a small picture that the delivery person took of my package at the door, just to have extra peace of mind that it actually made it there. So I thought that was a really nice touch.
It's a really great touch. It's a reassurance strategy that keeps their competition at bay. And now they're talking about whether if you believe in the eco-friendly world in which we live today, that they want to have all of their vehicles eco-friendly by a particular time. They're kind of working toward that. So now they're adding a reassurance for that constituency, and they're adding another reassurance with the picture taking, and they're adding. I mean, it's really ingenious. So I think your podcast listeners, the thing I'd be kind of again having it kind of flow through my head and my business decision is anything I do with my clients, I'm looking at this concept of, do I make it easy to acquire? Do I perform? And then how do I reassure? And then what does that look like? And how do I play that? And I don't fall into the trap where I allow someone else to define my brand. Anytime I give a self promotion or do an ad or whatever, I'm comparing myself to something that I can control. I'll give you an example of that. If I just said to your podcast audience, if we were live, in a live audience, and I said, I'm going to yell out the name of the cereal category. You yell out the name of the cereal. And I know we have not scripted this with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I yelled out, heart healthy cereal. What would you say?
Cheerios.
Cheerios.
Yeah, it's Cheerios. And there you go, right? So for any of you that are on the podcast that yelled that out too, you'd be right, but you'd be wrong. Because think about it. Cheerios is a complex carbohydrate that tastes crappy, right?
Yep.
And not that it's just a complex carbohydrate that tastes crappy. By the way, I'm not piling on the Cheerios, but Cheerios got disintermediated in the 1960s, about 65, 66. And if you stay with me for a minute, I'll tell you a really interesting story. So think about this for a minute. Cheerios was the number one selling cereal in the cereal aisle in 1965, 1966. Something happened in the cereal world. And what happened was something called high fructose corn syrup. And when that happened, other brands came out. By the way, some of them from the same mills. So they're all complex carbohydrates. And what came out? Fruit Loops, Captain Crunch, Cocoa Krispies. Name your favorite brand, whatever your sweet cereal favorite is, that as you get older, you're never supposed to eat anymore. Well, what happened is you got older, you're not supposed to eat that anymore. What happens to Cheerios? It goes by the wayside because it tasted crappy anyway, and you find something else. So Cheerios is trying to figure out, how do I then increase my market share in the cereal aisle? And then they figured it out. Older population, can't win the Fruit Loop battle, can't win the Captain Crunch battle. Our stuff still tastes crappy. You say, oh, but they came out with Honey Nut. Honey Nut never took off relative to the sweet cereals. They still sell it. They never took off. So they came out with this moniker, Heart Healthy Cereal. And both of you yelled, hey, it's Cheerios. And I bet a lot of people on the podcast said the same thing wherever they're listening. So the point is, how do they get a heart healthy moniker if they're all complex carbohydrates? Theirs just taste crappy, some of the other ones don't. Well, the way they got it was they compared themselves. Again, remember the rule. Great brands never compare themselves with things they don't control. That what they decided to do was, because they wanted to control the narrative, right, is to put themselves in a position where they compared themselves to a bacon and egg breakfast fried in butter. Well, if you compare yourself to a bacon and egg breakfast fried in butter, you'd be heart healthy, right? And I know it sounds obvious and we kind of laugh about it, but over the last 15 years, they've created this amazing brand as the heart healthy cereal, when all cereals are complex carbohydrates. In their case, they tasted crappy. The good news for them is it increased their market share in the cereal aisle again. And little changes in the cereal aisle make huge differences. 1.7% to 1.9% market share in the cereal aisle is huge revenue complications. So kind of interesting when you think about it. So I guess my point is, as your listeners are thinking about their brand, are they making it easy to acquire? Are they performing? And then have they created ways to reassure? And if they're doing those things, that's kind of cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think the examples that you've brought up along the way of individuals being able to embrace those tenets are really powerful as well. And I think having strong performance over a really consistent period of time is just the ultimate way to build a brand. Because I think, ultimately a brand is about consistency, right? It's about delivering the same thing and the same high quality product day in and day out. So I think those three things are all rules that we should be living by in sales and in marketing.
Agree.
So how do we go about the thought around, Jay, you just mentioned a brand should have consistency, and I agree with that. But also, don't you think that a brand should also operate as a living, breathing thing? Because it is going to be influenced by inputs, whether that's an outside input, whether that's an internal input. Doesn't a brand evolve, and shouldn't a person not be so rigid and thinking that, hey, if I have a brand, it has to be this way all the time? and they should continue to think about ways to branch out and be more fascinating. I mean, Mark, what would you say around that?
Oh, I think that the graveyard of great brands where their businesses have failed is large, deep, and wide. And whether it be Kodak in the film industry, who actually discovered pixels first and decided not to do digital and wanted to stay, if you will, not even analog, but film based, and laughed the engineers out of the room and said, who would ever buy this? Again, mid 70s, right?
Yeah.
Who would ever buy this in mid 70s? And we're in the film business and we sell film and we develop prints. You can see what happened in that business. I think you can just look across the landscape. There are hotel chains that didn't make it that thought they had a value premise. Planet Hollywood. I don't know that I'm going to go stay and pay a premium to stay at a hotel just because a bunch of movie stars and musicians and all put their name on it. But Hard Rock Cafe made it. And they made it a completely different way because it was more about what they were delivering, right, within the brand, as opposed to taking a shot at just the brand itself. And to your point, listening to feedback is very important. And part of reassurance is, I know we get surveyed to death today because electronically they're so much easier to do, whether it's Survey Monkey or something else. But the fact of the matter is, those that really understand what they're about are always looking for opportunity to either expand their product line, create other niches that make sense. But what happens typically, Arjun, that I would just mention anyone on this call is when you see great brands, the company fail. Typically, the brand itself doesn't fail. It's the company that fails. And the reason the company fails is because what they do is they create line extension into areas that they're not very good at. And then they spend all that excess capital that they could have been reinvesting into things, and they just continue to lose money and continue to lose money. And then at some point, they get to the point of no return with losing money. So, for example, Harley Davidson's a pretty darn good motorcycle brand. But Harley Davidson perfume failed miserably. I mean, Harley
Surprisingly.
Davidson in the perfume business, I just don't get it. But that's a great fail. It's an epic fail. And they spent a lot of time on it, but it wasn't because Harley Davidson isn't a great brand. They don't make good motorcycles. It was because they went into line extension. They sucked out all their cash flow to pay for something that wasn't working, and it bled them their balance sheet dry. So I think to your point is you have to be smart about it. You have to have a diverse set of inputs, whether it's on your board of directors, whether it's the people leading the company, whether it's your employee pool. I think that's a big deal. And then you've got to be willing to make some changes, but at the same time, you got to be willing to realize what you're really good at. Right. And it doesn't mean you can't do other things, but you really have to understand when you pull away from your core strengths, the risk that you bring to yourself or to your business. So for example, if you were working your way up in the medical profession and you were a really well-known emergency room doctor or nurse, just transferring to ICU tomorrow just because you want to be the next ICU brain surgeon might be a great idea, but it's going to have significant ramifications to your brand and the patients you're calling on if you don't have that skill set. And that's what we're getting at. Doesn't mean you're not a doctor, but the way you built your brand was as an emergency room doctor. Yeah. How do you carry that forward, and what does that look like? So,
yeah, a question on that topic too. As someone like yourself that has ascended the ranks of an organization and seen other people ascend the ranks, which requires taking on new roles and responsibilities in each new position. How do you kind of keep a consistent brand and a consistent sort of core value prop, that you offer your organization as an individual while moving into these new roles that require different things from you?
Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of mentoring a lot of young people over the years, and now as I'm getting older, it seems like that's just part of who I am and who I am within the organization that I'm a part of. But even when I look at college kids that we mentored to bring them into our organization, there are a few things that I see that typically continue to be, how would I use the term, non-negotiable, I guess. So I mentioned one of them earlier, the idea about being on time. So I'll just tell you a little story background that might help with this. So a young lady at her college took an internship. They hired 12 kids this semester and she got hired. She did the internship and it was with the prison system, the local police department, and the university. And it was a gang intervention kind of program. And they were trying to get kids out of gangs early, identify them as high risk to gangs, and then give them after school activities and things so they wouldn't get into gangs and they would choose other activities. After the first semester, she got hired to be the student liaison that would hire the next 11 uh, individuals for those intern roles. And she was going to get paid a whopping $11 an hour on top of it, where the first semester she did it for free as an internship. And in the conversation I had with her, I asked a question, and her answer actually astounded me in its simplicity. And I said, why did they choose you? Again, we're getting back to the brand thing, Arjun, that you asked earlier, about how do you become one of the two or three, right? Shelf of the mind theory. 12 people could get this job. They're going to pick one. I got it. How did I do it? And it wasn't because you were smart, and it wasn't because you had the highest grade point average, and it wasn't answer. What it was, and this is her answer to me directly from her tongue. I showed up on time, I dressed appropriately, and I didn't text while I was working. Let me just repeat that. I showed up on time, I dressed appropriately, and I didn't text while I was working. And I would submit, whether you're doing that as an internship, out of school, or whatever, if you show up and you have a professor that's going to write a letter of recommendation for you for grad school, and you don't show up on time, and you're texting while you're in his office, and you don't dress appropriately, you're not going to get a letter of recommendation. It's just not going to work that way. So literally, I was at the beach this weekend with a person that runs a very large surfboard company in Southern California. And we were having a conversation because I was in their shop earlier last week to pick up some surfboard stuff for a trip. And it was really interesting because the person I was talking to was talking about an employee they've had for a long time who's a really good employee. And then I said, how's it going with all the other employees? Because you turn over a lot. And he goes, we turn over employees weekly. We hire them, we get rid of them within a week. And I said, really? What are the reasons why you get rid of them? And he said to me, 35 years in the surf industry, they don't show up on time. They don't dress appropriately. And they're texting while they're working, and they're not saying hello to our customers when they come in to buy stuff. Right. And we warn them, we tell them, and we train them, but they still do it. And then they think that we're, really, their term, not mine, that we're really putting the heat on them for it, when it's just, we want client service. When someone comes in, just smile and say, hey, how can I help you? And they won't do it. And we just turn these kids over and over and over for years, no matter how they change their training model, no matter how they change, it's just what it is. So.
No, those are legitimately small tweaks that anyone can be making to turn their current process or their current situation into something that's more desirable for define your end client, whatever that is. But these are just small tweaks that people can be making for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
It reminds me of that list that I think you guys may have seen, 10 things that require zero talent. If you haven't checked out that list, I would check it out. I've seen it on NBA head coaches whiteboard when they're talking to their team. I've seen a number of different CEOs in financial services and other industries cite this list. So it's basically exactly what Mark is saying. There are things that are just table stakes. They're just non-negotiables. And fortunately for all of us, they don't require an exceptional IQ or exceptional technical skills to execute on. They're just doing the right thing, showing up, being on time, having energy, being coachable, all those things that we are in control of.
Yeah.
I know you want to talk about hotels at some point, but before you do that, given your experience in financial services, you said 30 plus years, can you talk about some of the conversations you've had with the people that you've worked with where, they move up the ranks, they did well, and then maybe they start to plateau, maybe their process becomes a little bit more average. How do you have the conversation with these people around going from an average process to having something that's more unforgettable. So if you think about our industry, or the financial services industry, if you're a wholesaler and you did everything you needed to go from internal to external, and then when you get to external, you kind of get into that cruise control. How do you have the conversation with somebody to go from that average process to something that's more unforgettable?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that generally speaking, we're all going to fall into that trap at some point,
Mm.
myself included. So in my own personal situation, when I sort of hit that plateau and felt myself in that, I found a couple things, and I don't want to be too spiritual on this, but I think it really cuts to the matter of it. Uh, when you let pride run away with you, and you start letting your pride get out of control, and you think you're better than others, when you start to create this entitlement within yourself, because if you're a leader, then you're going to create an entitlement culture, which is never going to work in the long run. You have to really guard your heart against those things happening. And when they do happen, a couple things have to take place. One is you got to be really honest with yourself, which is really hard to do, and most of us can't do that, me included. The other thing is, and again, I don't know how you script this, but you hope you're with some people that you're working with that are willing to tell you the truth about what you're doing. And if you don't have mentors and the people you work with, you really don't trust them and you don't think they have your best interest at heart, it's really going to be hard to overcome that and get out of that habit, if you will, or
Right.
get out of those skills. And typically what happens with people like that is they make lateral moves outside of the company somewhere else, and then they try to invent themselves when it's really all the same.
Yeah.
What they did was it was about choosing an attitude. And I think what you have to do is you have to realize there are times when you just don't feel like doing it. And to your point, when you do it over a long period of time and you use the term cruise control, we put in our organization a lot of minimum standard type of things on number of calls and other things, not because we want to be policemen, but we want to hold to a standard and accountability that we can enforce. So when someone slips, we can have a conversation with them that's legitimate and helpful to get them back in track, because we don't want them to lose their career, make all their decisions emotionally, and run their whole career based on a set of feelings. Because there are going to be days when you don't have the right feelings in place, and you got to be able to suppress those feelings and move along and take responsibility for your actions. And I think that if you don't do that, you sort of spin into this victim mentality, and then it's everyone's fault but your own. And the minute you spin in that it's somebody's fault but your own, and I'm a victim, it's very hard to resurrect your career. I don't care what it is, because you can't hold victims accountable. You can't,
Right.
if you have to make a sales number or you have to do something else, and someone's victimized all the time, they're not going to be able to hold a standard. I don't care what the standard is. They don't even
100%.
hold any standard, much less one. So
Right.
to Jay's
Yeah.
point on the 10 things you can do without talent, I'm sure that could probably be part of that. I've never seen that list.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's really, really powerful. Well, I know we're starting to approach the top of the hour here. Would love to hear about how you think about logos and how logos can be differentiated and successful in different
Sure.
ways.
Yeah. So, one of the things to think about is if you think about the hotel industry, and I get it, the industry right now is in a lot of turmoil. But if you look at like Motel 6, Marriott Courtyard, and the Ritz Carlton, what you see there is you see three really good brands. But I think everyone on this podcast would recognize the price point at Motel 6 is different than the price point at Marriott, which is different than the price point at the Ritz. What I find interesting is that sometimes organizations want to be the Ritz Carlton, and they want to have the robe and the nice towels and the spa and the fitness center and the really good restaurants, and being these premier locations with a view of the beach or up in the mountains or something, relative to a Motel 6, on the corner of an interstate highway. Again, both are very good brands, but the Ritz Carlton people want to try to charge Motel 6 prices, but they want to give all this other stuff. And the Motel 6 people, they're happy charging low prices and not giving any of that stuff. But some people chase just to get share, and they want to give all the stuff that erodes their margin. And you see that. I'm not saying with those three hotel chains. I think they're very good at differentiating their brand and where they're at, right? What their logos are about and what they're trying to drive home. But if you think about the motto of Motel 6, Tom Bodette has been the spokesperson for them for over 30 years. And his line is, "We'll leave the light on for you."
Yeah.
Now the light might be broken, or the light might be, might be dim, whatever, but you're gonna leave the light on for you. You don't pay a person for 30 years to leave the light on for you unless that's really effective. And the Ritz-Carlton is trained and trains world's class organizations about the Ritz-Carlton service experience. And they're two very different things, but you don't see them, if you will, going back and forth. Does that mean that we're not seeing that today with technology, where people can erode prices and get in, margin wars and all? No, of course not. But I think you just need to understand where you are, whether it's your brand and your organization or your brand yourself, and how you ultimately price yourself into the market. And if you're going to low price yourself in the market, then don't give those other things. And if you're going to high price yourself in the market, then you got to give a little bit more. And that's just the point of something to think about. And I think you can think about it with your own career, just as you can think about it with certain brands and what that looks like.
How would you think about it in terms of your own career?
Yeah, I think the issue there is you have to decide, is it you or is it the platform? And there are certain platforms that are going to pay a certain amount. And no matter how good you are, you're only going to make X on the platform, whatever that platform is, technology company, medical company, whatever. Here's the way I would look at it. I got some really great advice 30 years ago from one of my first sales manager mentors. He made a comment to me. He said, if you call on purchasing agents, and nothing wrong with purchasing agents, by the way, I make the statement. If you call on purchasing agents, you'll make purchasing agent money. If you call on CEOs, you'll make CEO money. So what you have to think about is, and again, I know in the world of technology today, where it could be, you're going to make your income based on the number of likes you have or how many followers you have or whatever. That's a little different model today. But I think you got to be pretty clear on what it is you want to accomplish. And then you got to decide if where you're currently residing, if you will, in your own mind, in your own heart, with your own skill level and your own talent, if you can get to what you want. If you can't, you got to either add skills, right? Develop your talent, or find a different platform. And those things are all very difficult to do. But if you think about it, and they all get down to one thing, they all get down to goal setting. And what attitude you're going to have around your goal setting, and then make decisions based on the goals you set. And whether you're willing to make the sacrifices you need to make to put yourself in that position. I would encourage you, though, that if you're willing to take responsibility and action in a society of rights and privileges, you will excel. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you are, what your sex, culture, ethnic background, or whatever, you'll excel. We just want people that want to excel, and then we pay them really well to do it.
What else is interesting to me is around, I'm just thinking about even branding when it comes to like supermarkets and grocery stores. And, when you think about a Trader Joe's versus a Whole Foods versus a Safeway, I mean, the decisions that are being made at those three different organizations, they're all different, but, it's interesting that there's this, you can form a cult mentality around some of these things. So,
no doubt. A following that's amazing. And again, if you look at those, the cult mentality around the ones that have cult status are because they're really good at making it easy to acquire, or they hold back where only a certain amount of people can get in. But if you're one of the ones that gets in, it creates this illusion of exclusivity, right? But they know what their model is, because it's always the last customer that's the most profitable customer, right? The last customer has the highest profit margin. If it takes 100 customers to break even and you have 101, the 101st customer is the most profitable customer. If you have 110, it's the 10th, if you will, the 110th customer is the most profitable, right?
Right.
So it's the same thing that you're describing, is what does that look like and how do you scale it at that point?
Awesome. Well, you've given us a ton to think about, Mark. I really appreciate all the insight. I can tell you've been delivering this program for a long time. I have a number of quotes written down here. It's like you're speaking in quotations. So I'm sure our listeners got a lot out of it. Again, it's the Power Brand program. Mark Warren, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Rising Laterally. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and were able to walk away with some new thinking that could help you in your personal or professional growth. Please make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. And if you know of someone who could benefit from this episode, we'd love for you to pass it along. See you next week.